Hi, I'm Justin.
Also, I hate the way my voice sounds, so if you can, do whatever Photoshop does to voices, make me sound awesome.
And this is my lovely friend,
The beauty in the eyes of the beholder, and it's just about getting into the seat of being the beholder.
Hayley.
I don't think you have to be particularly perceptive. I just think you have to look up.
This podcast is mostly just her telling me stories.
If you expose yourself to the possibility that this might be really awkward, there can be something just really cool on the other side of it.
She thinks that her life and way of looking at things are
Oh, I was kind of waiting on you. I thought you were getting your stuff ready. You're waiting on me?
pretty normal.
You got to edit out all the misinformation about the Amish.
Maybe you can relate.
I would like a chance to re-sing the Amish Paradise.
If you want lighthearted stories
All right, you want to talk about goats?
and stream of consciousness,
I just woke up and needed some friends, and so I bought them.
then you're gonna like the Sunny Side Up podcast.
Sunny side up, sunny side up, sunny side up, sunny side up.
So, if you're at all like me, you may feel that you're living in a world that can be a bit overwhelming and confusing at times. I'm also a huge fan of podcasts, documentaries, docudrama stories, and of just information in general. Between all of that and the social media and news, sometimes our brains can feel like they're on overload. Hayley and I hope that this podcast can be something of an antidote to all of that. Like little jello shots of joy and distraction. None of it is too serious or really too informative. Mostly it's just two friends who have conversational chemistry talking about whatever enters the minds of relatively ADHD people. We hope you enjoy.
So, whenever I was in about the 4th grade,
Yeah.
my mom and dad decided that they were a little jaded from making money the usual ways. And they just wanted to move to Florida and sell snow cones. So we left here and moved to the bustling metropolis of Fort White, Florida.
Ooh, a little
Yeah.
crossover with me. Okay.
Yeah, so that was a fun discovery for me, was coming to Atlanta to discover that you and I both had our roots in this tiny little town that, as I recall, was like one gas station,
Yeah.
a public library,
Yes.
and an elementary school in the nearby community.
And the
and
last...
a snow cone stand
Well,
for one for one hot minute.
right, for one odd minute. Sadly, and of course I haven't visited Fort White area or Air Florida now for a couple of years, but that's the way I remember it last. It was still it was a true one horse town.
Yeah, the
That's
springs, swimming in those springs, there was
Magical.
and probably the only draw that I can think
that's
of.
it. It's the only reason I can think of to live there. Yeah.
We we would dig through. We went and lived in my great grandmother's house that was there. It was about 150 years old.
Wow.
Or maybe it was 150 years old when she lived in it. It was just very, very, very old, and there was no electricity. Which,
Wait, you lived in a house with no electricity?
I mean, did we end up with electricity? It didn't have air conditioning. We did eventually have electricity so that we could run the microwave, because we lived off of microwavable food for most of that summer. There was no hot water. We did have cold water.
Wow.
So that was a fun summer, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Core memories.
Yes.
But we dug through the artifacts that were left behind. My great grandmother passed in the 80s, and yet there were still rooms that still had a lot of the family things. Like one particular trunk we opened up, and what is this white robe with this pointy hood? Yes, indeed. That one disappeared pretty quickly, but it was in fact in there, and brings up fun conversations about, the nature of, the origins of the Ku Klux Klan, from the Greek word for circle, kuklos.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was like a neighborhood watch organization is how it started out, to protect to protect the women and the children from bad guys. But no, I mean, that's...
George Zimmerman would love that. That's amazing. Wasn't he the guy who shot Trayvon?
In Florida.
In Florida,
yeah.
So I'm thinking, wow, that's really interesting. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, you never know when you start digging around in the literal or proverbial trunks of like your past. Like,
Yes.
what the heck is going to come up? Wow.
The good folks, and I don't know, like I never heard any other stories about that. I know the neighborhood was, it was poor whites and poor blacks,
Yeah.
and they were all friends from all accounts that,
Right.
Stories that we heard.
But I
growing
will
up.
say that, like, when I first moved to Florida, which would have been in like '89, I think is when we moved to Florida. I really do remember at some point within those first couple of years hearing the word Dixie Mafia was still alive and well in like North Florida and then South Georgia, because that's one whole state. I always say that line is.
I wonder what that recruitment process looks like.
They got more than 4 teeth. You're out, Jimmy. I don't know. Yeah, but I do remember a couple of like really unpleasant. Listening to some people say some really horrible things about black folks in that area, and was like they did it with sort of impunity, like it was okay, and and if you spoke up, it was just like, who are you? What are you talking about? Like there were some definitely when you got into the good old boy area, and there's actually, if I remember right, in Lake City, which is of course right next to Fort White, it's all vague memory, but there was like one particular bar that's stashed out in the woods. And I remember like you bump into like black folk, I think still to this day, meaning the last time I was there, won't go to it because there's actually been more than one black guy who was like killed, body never recovered type of deal, that like wandered into that place and like went out the back door never to be seen again. So it's definitely, I mean, I'm sure it's progressing and advancing and it's not nearly like that as much anymore, but I could see like if there was already remnants, if there were still remnants of that when I got there, it had to be hardcore, brutal back in the day when your grandmother.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and that would have been my great-grandmother's, great-grandfather's trunk. I'm pretty sure that was his. We also found like a gas mask from one of the world wars.
Probably one.
Were we using gas mask in one?
We did, because that's where that was the first time that the Germans released mustard gas on somebody. I can't remember who, the French or somebody, and that was the first time that it had ever been done. And then that was when the Haig or whatever came up with and said, this is a bit of niche.
Yes, the rules of war.
Yeah, the rules of war. You're allowed to kill people, but
do it only under these certain ways.
Right.
Which, I mean, if we're allowed to choose, I would probably elect for myself nuclear.
Okay,
I
fair.
mean, if like instant subatomic disassembly sounds preferable to.
Yeah, I think the problem is that's okay if you're like in the
epicenter. That's true.
Yeah. It gets super wonky.
Just be melted down from the outside or worse.
And then living, and then just growing extra body parts and
so we're going to scratch nuclear off the list of allowable war things.
Right. Yeah.
Right below mustard. No mustard gas. No nuclear.
Mustard gas. No nuclear. Yeah. We're gonna make this like like why don't you guys just go like break dance? Like I think that's what like Putin.
A dance off.
Like okay, hear me out.
For Ukraine, for Crimea, like we're gonna dance off for this territory.
Yeah.
I'm about this, but I'm also not the one to send. Who are you sending to do your dance off?
Right. It's gonna have to be like your top guy.
American Idol for the.
Yeah.
Who represents you?
Or no, who can dance? Isn't there one called Who Can Dance? Or You Think You Can Dance? Yeah, there's probably a show about dancing. You'd have to send some of those people to a dance off. You wouldn't want to send like, I don't know, like an Adam Lambert or something who can just sing really good, but I don't know if he can dance.
But it's war. So it's war. So do we send an army of dancers?
Ooh.
And like they eliminate each other until like that is the competition?
I like that. Yeah. So it's not just like one-on-one sudden death. There's actually like, you could turn it then into a reality show and get people really glued. And then like
the rest of the world votes. Yeah,
people be voting on it. And then there's also like this like, hey, whoever wins like decides whether this country goes to Putin or not. That could be, it would really up the ante. And it would help with viewership.
That's true. Get more people invested in that conflict.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine if, like, you lived in, like, a Ukraine or something, you'd be like, I'm tuning into this show. Because there's a lot riding on the dancers. So.
Am I willing to lose my homeland?
Over a dance.
Yeah, through my inability to do the Charleston.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, it's one of the big questions that we all face right now.
Is how well you can dance?
Are you willing to lose your country because you can't do the Charleston? I mean,
oh, that question.
Very specific.
Yes. We would totally lose this country over my inability to do the Charleston because I tried it one time and no, it was probably just performance anxiety.
Yeah.
But it was a very definite no from me.
Yeah.
It was a class field trip, which was an interesting decision to take a bunch of kids to try to learn dancing on the spot and then perform it for their peers because that's what preteens really enjoy is
for sure.
doing new things that they're insecure about in front of their peers.
Yeah. Classic. That's amazing. Hello, lovely friends. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. And it would mean the world if you would tell other people about this podcast and maybe even spam your social media accounts with just how much you're enjoying it. If you are, of course. Also, commenting and rating us on whatever platform you're downloading or streaming from is incredibly helpful to a little startup podcast like this one. On the other hand, if you are dissatisfied with your listening experience, please leave all of that hate on someone else's podcast. Just maybe to confuse them a little bit, right? But most of all, we hope you keep looking up and looking for the sunny side of life.